It's an ideal opportunity to discuss an alternate folklore, and time to get back to the Scandinavian frozen lands once more, given that on our first involvement with the Norse gods, we required more information to provide an astonishing video and depiction about these gods. This time around, more information and better subtleties will be given about the divinities, to fathom the Norse domain in more vital detail, on this new section, Norse Gods of Mythology Remake. Widely worshipped by the Germanic peoples of the Middle Ages, Odin, furious lord of ecstasy and inspiration, was the highest of deities and the chief of the Aesir tribe of gods and goddesses. Known as All-Father, among many other epithets, Odin was usually depicted with one eye and a long beard. He would often be accompanied by his familiars, the wolves Gary and Freki, and ravens Hugin and Munin, and rode an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. Befitting his kingly stature, Odin was also a mighty warrior. It was said that he never lost a battle. There were even some who believed he could not lose a battle. Despite his military prowess, Odin defied many conventions of the warrior king archetype, so highly idealized by the Norse. While Odin kept his court at Asgard, one of the 9 realms in Norse mythology, he preferred to wander in the disguise of a traveler. He sought knowledge above all else, of his enemies and the future, and courted shamans, seers, and necromancers in order to attain it. He spoke in poetry and riddles and commanded beasts, even taking their forms upon occasion. Though hero gods, such as the mighty Thor, fought with brute strength and bravado, the trickster god Odin dismissed these tools in favor of craft and cunning. Odin's chief attributes were his wit, wile, and wisdom. Having cultivated the magical arts of Cedar, the set of rituals enabling foresight, Odin could see the future and commune with spirits and the dead. He was also a shapeshifter who could take the form of snakes, eagles, and other powerful creatures. Additionally, Odin spoke in poetic verse and had the power to bewitch humans into committing deeds outside their characters. Odin was often depicted with a staff or spear, but otherwise wielded no specific weapons. On multiple occasions, he consulted with the decapitated and embalmed head of Mimir, which revealed many secrets to him. As the All-Father and chief god of the diverse Norse pantheon, Odin figured prominently in all of the central mythological traditions, from the creation of the first humans, and the Aesir Vanir war that united the gods into a single pantheon, to the prophecies of Ragnarok marking the end of time. A paragon of strength and masculine virility, the storm god Thor was the fiercest of Norse deities. He was the son of Odin, the All-Father, and a member of the Aesir tribe of deities. Among his many abilities, Thor commanded storms and rain, and brought lightning and thunder. Due to his prodigious sexual appetite and his aptitude for impregnating women, Thor was also associated with fertility. He wielded a warhammer called Mjolnir, and was thought to have red hair and a red beard. Brave, powerful, and righteous, Thor fully embodied the hero archetype. Where Odin and Loki skulked and schemed, Thor faced his problems with a hammer in his hand and violence in his heart. Whenever a fearsome beast or wily Jotun threatened their peace, the gods generally turned to Thor for intervention. Thor hated many creatures, but none so much as Jormungandr, the sea serpent of Midgard, one of the 9 worlds and the home of humans. The monster eventually grew so large that it completely encircled Midgard and held its own tail in its mouth. During Ragnarok, the fate of the gods and the end of days for the Norse, Thor and Jormungandr were fated to meet again. According to the predictions offered by the Valva narrator of the Valispa, also in the Poetic Edda, the events of Ragnarok would begin when the serpent of Midgard released its tail from its mouth and wriggled onto dry land. There it would join its brother Fenrir, who would set the world aflame while Jormungandr filled the air with poison. Thor and Jormungandr would meet one last time, and while Thor was fated finally to kill his foe, he would sustain mortal wounds in the process. Thor would take 9 steps after felling the serpent before succumbing to the serpent's poison and dying. The great trickster god of the Norse pantheon, Loki was a devious deity known for his many schemes and deceptions. A shapeshifter, Loki's forms were as varied as the motives for his mischief, which included wealth, women, wisdom, and the sheer pleasure of his knavery. With Loki, appearances were never quite what they seemed. While Loki's antics frequently embroiled the gods in sticky situations, his tricks often rescued them from troubled times as well. Loki was the preeminent shapeshifter amongst the gods. On various occasions, he took the form of a salmon, a flea, a fly, and a mare. He also took the form of human beings, such as an old woman named Thug, who faithfully refused to weep for the fallen Boulder. Loki married the goddess Sigyn, about whom little is known, except that by Loki she had a son named Nari or Narfi. Loki also reproduced with his mistress Angroda, a Jotun giantess who gave birth to 3 children, Hel, who ruled the eponymous underworld called Helheim, Jormungandr, the sea serpent of Midgard and arch-nemesis of Thor, and Fenrir, the massive wolf fated to slay Odin during Ragnarok. Loki gave birth to another of his children on his own. During an escapade in which he had taken the form of a mare, Loki was impregnated by a stallion called Svadilfari. Some time later, Loki birthed Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse, who was to become Odin's favorite mount. During Ragnarok, the sequence of events leading to the death and rebirth of the world, Loki was said to play a decisive role. Ragnarok's beginning would be marked by Loki's release from bondage, and the trickster would eventually join the side of the Jotnar in their conflict against the gods. Loki's children, Jormungandr and Fenrir, would also contribute to the demise of the gods. In the end, Loki himself would turn into a seal, and battle Heimdall, in which both were fated to die in the melee. Shining Boulder of the Aesir tribe was the loveliest and most beloved of all the gods of the Norse pantheon. Boulder exuded charm, and was so physically beautiful that he gave off light. He was also described as the wisest of all the gods. As an arbiter of disputes, he settled feuds among gods and men. Boulder's death, as a result of Loki's treachery, was one of the central stories of Norse mythology. Universally lamented by the gods and by most of humanity, Boulder's demise precipitated Loki's imprisonment and helped set in motion the events of Ragnarok. Boulder's chief attributes were his fairness, beauty, and likability. He possessed a great ship called Hringhorni, meaning ship with a circle on its stem, which was said to be the greatest ship ever constructed. Upon Boulder's death, the ship was turned into a massive funeral pyre for his body and set to drift downriver. The story of Boulder's death was one of the best known and most critical myths in Norse society. When Loki found out about Boulder's immunity to harm, the trickster who delighted in the misfortunes that befell others took offense. Taking the form of a woman, he inquired Frigg of whether all things had sworn oaths. Not knowing the woman's true identity, Frigg conceded that she had not demanded the oath from a humble sprig of mistletoe. Seizing this news gleefully, Loki rushed off to locate the mistletoe and fashioned it into a spear. When he returned to the gods, they were hurling missiles at Boulder and making sporting fun of his invulnerability. In the meantime, Loki approached Hodder, Boulder's blind brother, and handed him the mistletoe spear. Under instruction from Loki, Hodder hurled the spear at Boulder, and mortally wounded him. As the other gods surrounded Boulder, Odin approached him and whispered a final message in his dying son's ear. What Odin said remains a subject of great mystery in Norse lore to this day. One of the principal deities of the Norse pantheon, the lovely and enchanting Freya was a goddess of blessings, love, lust, and fertility. A member of the Vanir tribe of deities, Freya shared her people's penchant for the magical arts of divination. It was Freya who introduced the gods to Seida, a form of magic that allowed practitioners to know and change the future. Freya was gentler and more agreeable than the other Norse deities. Where Thor accomplished his goals through aggression and Odin and Loki resorted to trickery, Freya achieved her ends with the gentler persuasions of gifts, beauty and sex. While Freya was often unselfish and helpful, she did have a darker side. Like the male gods, Freya had a taste for blood and fought fiercely in battle. It was said she took the lives of half the warriors ever slain in battle. While Freya did not typically wield weapons of war, she did possess many accoutrements of a different sort. One such item was a cloak made of falcon feathers, that gave the gift of flight to anyone who wore it. When she was not wearing it herself, Freya lent the cloak to companions and collaborators who agreed to do her bidding. Freya's most prized possession was likely the necklace or torque, known as Brisingamen. Brisingamen was made by dwarfs and purchased at a dear price. Freya guarded the necklace from any and all would-be thieves with a fiery passion. Freya was presented as a leading deity of the Vanir and a player in the Aesir Vanir War. She was the wife of Hodder, with whom she had the daughters, Nos and Gersimi, who were so very beautiful, that afterwards, the most precious jewels were called by their names. When the two sides reached a peace settlement, Odin asked Freya to oversee the offering of sacrifices. In this role, Freya preserved peace among the gods and maintained the cycles of fertility that kept the world in motion. She was praised and celebrated so much so, that her personal name was applied to all ladies of good social standing. Frey, of the Vanir tribe, was a Norse god of peace and prosperity. Among other things, he was associated with male virility, sunshine, and fair weather. Often depicted with an enormous phallus, Frey was worshipped across Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden, where he was celebrated at weddings and harvest feasts. Famous for his accoutrements, which included a magical ship, a golden boar, and a sword that fought on its own, Frey was fated to die in mortal combat during Ragnarok. Along with his twin sister Freya, Frey was among the most prominent of Vanir deities. Brought to the Aesir as a hostage at the conclusion of Aesir-Vanir War, he earned a prominent position in the Norse pantheon thanks to his charm and goodwill. At the Norse temple in Uppsala, Sweden, Frey occupied a leading role alongside Thor and Odin. Along with Boulder, he was the most beloved of all Norse gods. A man of many magical possessions, Frey commanded Skidbladnir, a ship forged in the furnaces of Svartalfheim by the dwarf craftsmen Brokkr and Sindri. Skidbladnir was as swift as any ship, and could be conveniently folded up and carried in Frey's pocket. Frey was also accompanied by another of Brokkr and Sindri's creations, the mechanical boar Gullinbursti. The boar boasted a golden mane and bristles that glowed in the deepest gloom. Finally, Frey wielded a sword that had the ability to fight on its own. The loss of this weapon would ultimately contribute to his demise during Ragnarok. Frigg is the queen of Asgard, and she might be the daughter of the giantess Judgin. Frigg is married to Odin, and together they had two sons, Boulder and Hodder. Frigg is a sorcerer and associated with love, marriage, fertility, and motherhood. She also has the power of prophecy, and yet she never reveals what she knows about the future. She is the only one other than Odin who is permitted to sit on his high seat, Hidskjalf, and look out over the universe. The name of her house is Fensalid. The name means marsh hall. Women would often go to the wet marshlands to worship the goddess. She might be associated with Friday, but there are conflicting sources, so it could also be the goddess Freya. Like Freya, Frigg was a vulva, or practitioner of the magical art of cedar, and sought to divine or alter the future through ritual. While the two goddesses were often presented as separate deities, they likely evolved from a single deity whose personality oscillated violently enough to merit separate identities. Freya, for instance, was known for sexual indulgence and promiscuity. Frigg, meanwhile, was more conservative in her sexual morality. Frigg represents home and family. She is known as a source of nurturing, patient and devoted love. Even in situations where fate is already set, such as in her son's untimely death, Frigg still did everything that she could to alter fate. Frigg's main symbols include the full moon, the sky, the spinning wheel and spindle, mistletoe and silver, many of which are shown in artistic representations of the goddess. Tyr was one of the oldest Norse gods and a fairly famous one for Scandinavian people and those in love with Norse mythology. There are some records that he was even the leader of all Norse gods before Odin. He was a god of war and justice. Due to his actions during the binding of the wolf Fenrir, Tyr is often portrayed as the bravest among the Aesir gods. The one-armed god of the Norse pantheon, Tyr was a member of the Aesir tribe, who represented war and bloodshed. Somewhat paradoxically, he was also known as a bringer of justice and order. Tyr was more than just a brave warrior. He was also a reliable source of wisdom and a champion of justice. Tyr's most notable attribute was his missing right hand or arm, generally depicted as being severed at the wrist or forearm. This missing limb had been devoured by Fenrir, the ravenous giant wolf sired by Loki and the Jotun giantess Angroda. This story, briefly recounted in the Gylfaginning, emphasized Tyr's bravery, as well as his willingness to sacrifice for justice. Fenrir grew up in Asgard and lived among the gods, though only Tyr was brave enough to approach him. With Gleipnir in hand, the gods sought to trap the beast once more. He only consented to the game after Tyr agreed to place an arm in his mouth. The great wolf struggled against his bonds, and for the first time found that he could not break them. Realizing that the gods did not intend to release him, Fenrir bit down on Tyr's hand. It was foretold that Tyr will fight Garm, the hellhound of the underworld, and meet his demise. Even though the one-armed god fought bravely and managed to slay his foe, he suffered wounds that he could not recover from. This is how Tyr, the divine force of war and justice, met his end. In Norse mythology, Hel is the queen of the realm of the dead. Every single person who dies from an illness, age, or is considered a coward or dishonorable by the gods and goddesses will end up in her realm called Helheim. This, in relation to the Viking Age, meant if you didn't die in battle you would simply just go to hell. Hel is a Jotun, and she is the daughter of the trickster Loki and the giantess Angroda. She has two siblings, the world serpent also known as Jormungandr, and the wolf Fenrir. They have no relationship with each other, and roam in separate places in the world. Her appearance is described as being half flesh-colored, just like a living human being, and half blue. Her personality traits are described as threatening, harsh, and cruel. It was Odin, the chief of the Aesir, who threw Hel down from the sky into the depths of the underworld. Then she made the underworld into her own realm and crowned herself Queen of Helheim. Helheim is surrounded by a tall fence, and the river Elivaga flows right next to the entrance. The gates of Helheim are called Nargrinda, or corpse gates, and they are located in Nipperhella, or the Nipper Cave, where the dog named Garm, which translates to Hellhound, is howling every time new people arrive. Hell has a huge hall, and inside her hall, everything has names associated with misfortunes. For instance, her dining table is called Hunger, and the knives are called Starvation. In her bedroom, her bed is called Sickbed, encapsulated with curtains called Misfortune.